Yes.
Let's give this about 30 seconds so we can get the attendees in the room. Okay, this is good. Over to you, Ian.
Yes, good. Thank you, Katya, and good morning, everybody in the West, and good afternoon to the rest of our audience, and welcome to our 2023 report on Ontario's top energy performing school boards. We should always begin with thanking our sponsors for the webinar, ENS Lighting, Kilmer, Set Point Controls, and Yorkland Controls. Thanks for your help in making all these things possible. And our program sponsor for Sustainable Schools is Enbridge Gas. So again, our appreciation to everybody who makes this work for us. The next slide, please. All Climate Challenge Network events begin with the land acknowledgement. And from coast to coast, we do acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of Métis, First Nations people who share these lands with us. For us here in Toronto, we're on the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit River. And this acknowledgement affirms our commitment and responsibility to reconciliation with Indigenous peoples and communities, and to advancing environmental sustainability in the lands that we share together. So to the next slide, please. Just by way of background, Climate Challenge Network, a large nonprofit group that runs programs in a number of different building sectors. Today, we're speaking specifically to our programming around K-12 schools. Again, our thanks go out to our launch webinar sponsors, our program sponsor. My name is Ian Jarvis. I'm the Executive Director of Climate Challenge Network, and we'll be moderating the session this afternoon, and look forward to the conversations with everybody involved. Next slide, please. Sustainable Schools is a program. It's for those who are not familiar with us. We've been doing this for 15 years now. In the early years, we were working with school boards and school districts in all parts of North America, hunting down particularly energy efficient schools, case studies of schools that were making improvements, and sharing that. For the past 5 years, we've been working on reporting on the actual energy performance of Ontario's 5,000 K-12 schools and 72 school boards, and increasingly incorporating into the data results coming from other school districts across North America. You can find us at any time at sustainableschools.ca. The fundamentals of sustainable schools are energy targets, the idea of there's a rational amount of energy that each individual school building needs when it's running efficiently, and therefore how much energy and emissions can each school save and each school board save. We provide this annual reporting to recognize the most efficient school boards across Ontario. And we use the data to identify opportunities for data-driven applied research to fill knowledge gaps. And we'll share some of all of that with you over the course of the next hour today. Next slide, please. So our agenda for today, each year we've done this, it's been in the context of here's where we are, and here's the improvements that have been made, here is where we're going, here are the opportunities. This year we want to talk a little bit more about context. We've got some fairly important deadlines from our perspective coming up in terms of targeted greenhouse gas emission reductions. And very simply, we'll share with you, we're not on track to meet the targets that have been set within Canada, and we're in common with most of the rest of the world. So the context today is the need for acceleration, the need for a certain amount of urgency. We want to take a look with you at the trends within Ontario schools. And again, looking at data from other jurisdictions is not dissimilar from other parts of North America. We'll present the top performing school boards, drum roll at that point. So who are the top performing boards in the year that we're looking at for this particular report. But want to put more of the effort today, more of the attention today around closing that gap in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. In Ontario, we've got our energy conservation demand management planning period, 2024 to 2029 coming up. It's our time to regroup, kind of refocus and really decide how we're going to make substantive improvements over the next 5 years. Always delighted, we got 2 of our top performing school boards to share thoughts with us today in a Q&A session where we'll be asking questions of everybody on this webinar as well to share their thoughts, their ideas. We got a poll for the school boards on the line to get your direction and your ideas about where we're going, and then we'll talk a bit about next steps. So that's our plan for the next almost 1 hour. Next slide, please. So let's get right into the context of this. The blue line you see ahead of you, in front of you here, is Canada's commitment with respect to buildings and greenhouse gas emissions reductions from 2019 through to 2030. In 2030, Canada is committed to a 41% decline in greenhouse gas emissions associated with buildings. The red dotted line there is the current growth in natural gas consumption within Ontario, which is a proxy for greenhouse gas emissions. Very simply, the emissions, the natural gas consumption involved with buildings is steadily increasing at close to 1% per annum, where we're looking for 41% reduction. As you will gather, we're already at 2023, which is almost halfway through this chart. The gap is widening. We're on the wrong trajectory, and our belief based on all the science is that 41% reduction by 2030 is absolutely essential. If we don't get there, we won't get to the 2040 targets, we won't get to the 2050 targets, and we're not today going to dig into the implications of climate change. We see them all around us every day, but all of us have a role to play, all of us have a responsibility to play our part in getting down to that reduction, bending the curve, changing the trajectory, and that's really what today this particular webinar is all about. How do we get from the red dotted line down to the blue dotted line? And we'll share data and suggestions and best practices along those lines. Next slide, please. There's a context to that, which is there's a lot going on right now. We'll see the introduction of more and more specific building codes, we expect. We're aware of the work going on that front right now. Enbridge, our local gas distributor, its DSM program is underway right now from 2023 to 2025, at which point there'll be a new demand side management plan, which will have new programming, new ideas, new approaches, all aimed at closing that gap between where we need to be and where we are with respect to emissions. Our independent electrical system operator, CDM programming, we're halfway through that particular phase. The next phase will come along. And as I mentioned previously, in the green, we have our energy conservation plans, which we're going to suggest should look a whole lot different than the plans in the past. And they need to be a lot more effective than the plans we put in place in the past. And that really is our collective common task, is again to do the things to leverage the opportunities, the support available out there, but really make a commitment to achieving the kind of emissions reductions that are available from our schools, taking the necessary action and closing that gap. Next slide, please. So on to what's happening in Ontario these days. So as you know, we track the data from all of the schools in the province, and by extension, all of the school boards in the province, at least all of the public schools. And tracking those trends over time, I'll share with you what happened in 2020, 2021 compared to 2019, the previous year, 2019-20. And keep in mind, 2019-20, 6 months of that period was subject to school shutdowns as part of the COVID pandemic. 2020, 2021 year is the first year where we see the full effect of COVID, both in terms of some continuing school closures, but significant increases in the kind of standards that have been set, the kind of outside air volumes being used, kind of filtration being applied, and how that played out in terms of the energy use. So let's look and see what happened in 2020, 2021. This is one of the graphics, one of the visuals we'd like everybody to take away from today. What we're looking at is what are referred to as tornado diagrams, where the buildings at the top. So this is the actual school boards. So the 72 school boards in Ontario that are reporting. The ones in green at the top recorded savings in 2020-21 versus the previous year. The red ones at the bottom, those are increases. So the line up the middle is 0%. The savings, the green ones go to the right, the savings. And we'll call them at this time reductions, and the ones to the red are the increases. So electricity in the middle, you see that effect across 72 school boards, where the net difference was a 3% increase in electricity consumption compared to the previous year. And I'll show you the prior years in just a moment, because what happened in this particular year is we just lost some of the reductions the prior year that arose because of school shutdowns. So electricity, a net 3% increase. Natural gas, primarily, so thermal energy, mostly natural gas in Ontario, across the 72 boards, an 11.5% increase, costing almost 66,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Serious blow for our climate change objectives. The total energy sums those two together on the left-hand side. But this picture, again, it's set back in terms of climate change, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But given that we saw reductions the previous year, let's go to the next slide and see how this has been progressing over the years. So you can see here excuse me, I'm just going to lose the people so I can see the whole screen. So running through, if we look at electricity savings, the row on the top here, going back to 2016-17 versus the prior year, we saw a 4.7% improvement. We lost a bit of ground in 17-18 and so on. In 2019-20, with 6 months of COVID and school closures in effect there, we saw a 17% reduction in electricity use. So the 3% increase we just saw is just losing some of the ground that was gained there. And we're very interested to see in next year, in 2021-22, how that picture unfolds. And I'll again touch on this in a moment, that we will be updating the targets the standard targets we use for this analysis based on those results. With natural gas, you can see that again, we had small improvements in the first few years in there, a bit of a setback in 18-19, well before COVID, but a reduction last year, as again, a lot of HVAC systems were closed down during the period, but the 11.5% increase we've seen this year has offset all the gains we made in the past. So as of 2020, 2021, we've lost all the gains we'd made in previous years and are now into a significant deficit situation, which is the big driver of greenhouse gas emissions. So that big jump in thermal energy use has our attention. It's the area of greatest concern to us, and it's the one that we're recommending to everybody as should command our greatest attention in the year to come, in the action we're going to take now and the years to come. Next slide, please. And this gets to the one of the key messages for all the school boards, school districts on this call is know where you stand. So across the in this case, 4,385 schools that made it through our data cleaning checks. Across all of those, the performance was very different. Again, we see some that actually made reductions in electricity, made reductions in gas consumption. A lot of that is related to proactive energy efficiency work, but a lot of schools in the lower part of these curves saw increases in excess of 50%, which is far beyond what the COVID response should have led to, and requires, again, know where you stand, that every school board, all of your schools are on these charts. We're happy to share with you which of these schools are yours. Your particular board is on the previous charts and happy to share with you where they're at, but knowing where you stand is recommended, proposed as the starting point for action to deal with the schools that suffered the most during this period in terms of their energy use and emissions, and help them take action to make improvements on a go-forward basis. So knowing where you stand is a key message. That's the starting point of developing, designing appropriate action. Next slide, please. So getting to the top performing boards. So, and again, these are unusual times because there is so much volatility around the response to COVID. These times, hopefully and mercifully, will stabilize over the years to come. And again, it's time to be planning for the action we're going to take to deliver very material reductions on a go-forward basis. But once again, our starting point is where we're coming from. So the top performing boards report, our next slide, please. This is what this looks like. So again, we're comparing every school in the province, every school building, including administration buildings and so on, against the pre-COVID standard targets as a means of, or if you like, a standardized way of evaluating the performance of individual buildings. What that drives is for each of the 72 school boards in the benchmark chart on the left, what their savings potential is, where the green is thermal energy, mostly natural gas, the blue is electricity. So these are their target savings. You can see every board has its own profile. And again, understanding that profile is the right starting point for planning effective action going forward. But the savings potential across the boards, where the most efficient boards are somewhere around 13–14% overall savings potential, because some of their schools still have opportunities, all the way up to the least efficient boards at this point have more than 40% savings potential. And again, keep coming back to knowing where you stand is the starting point for effective planning and action. Next slide, please. Drum roll. So these are all the top performing school boards in Ontario for the 2020-2021 year. The 2023 ranking, which is on the left-hand side there. Congratulations to the Ottawa Catholic School Board with an improvement of 2 places from the prior year. That is now the most efficient school board in the province. Congratulations to our other panelists coming up shortly with the Peel District School Board, which you'll see fourth from the bottom. That's moved up 7 places to enter the top 20 for the first time this year. And we're very aware of some of the work that they are doing. And that's why we wanted to share some of that with you today. 3 other school boards found their way into the top 20 this year. So congratulations to them. But this is our ranking. These are the school boards that have been the most efficient and managed the challenges of the pandemic operations the most effectively. So 1,500 of our approximately 3,500 schools are within this group. These are our top 20 school boards. Congratulations to you. And we will be talking with you over the course of the year to profile the things that you're doing to make improvements. Next slide, please. If we take the math the other way, so if you look at the remaining savings potential for all of the schools, This for our friends, the IESO, with Enbridge Gas, with the Ministry of Energy, with the Ministry of Education, and with the Ministry of Environment. These for us are the key numbers. This is a reasonable, again, given we're in the midst of volatile times, this we think is a rational estimate of how much can be saved without major capital investments. So this is, if we take all of the schools we have right now, we run them as efficiently as we already know how to, the way the top quartile is, which is how these metrics are set. We can lower our electricity use by about 21%, our gas consumption by about 39%, our utility costs by about $90 million a year, and our greenhouse gas emissions by almost 250,000 tons a year. These are meaningful numbers. They provide a substantive contribution to the challenges that Ontario, Canada, and the world are facing. And this is kind of a call to arms, if you like, a rallying cry to school boards across the province. Let's get on with this now. Let's really bear down on this opportunity. Let's make it happen. Let's save the money. Let's reduce the emissions. Let's make a meaningful step towards the low carbon future. Next slide, please. So closing the gap. So going back to the gap we presented at the beginning, which is we've got very clear goals in terms of emissions reductions by 2030, 2040, 2050. We're on the wrong trajectory right now. It behooves every one of us as individuals and as organizations to play our part to bend that curve to get back on track. So we want to spend time, the majority of our attention today. History is interesting, it's instructive, it helps us provide the foundations for moving forward. But in Ontario, the upcoming energy conservation demand management plans are once in every 5-year opportunity to really step back and say, how well have we done in the past? And what more can we do going forward to really fulfill the potential that our buildings have to run more efficiently, the potential our organizations have to run our properties more efficiently and bend the curve, move in the right direction. So we're arguing your ECDM plans this year should look a whole lot different than they have been in the past, and they absolutely have to be a lot more effective than they have in the past. So closing the gap. Next slide, please. So as you start working on your planning, I know that the school boards here that are not from Ontario, so it's exactly the same principle. Look back over the past 5 years for your board as a whole and for your individual buildings and draw the insights. How many have gone down? How many have gone up? Which are the most efficient? Which are the least efficient? Learn from the past 5 years as you look to the next 5 years on what can we learn from our existing facilities? What are they trying to tell us about where the opportunities are? What we can share with you is that the more efficient school boards, the ones that were higher up our rankings, that were at the top of our rankings previously, fared better during the pandemic. And so we want to talk about resilience, that the same kind of things that you would do to prepare your buildings for the next pandemic, because there likely will be one, are the very same things as you will be doing to achieve energy efficiency and contribute towards the climate crisis, to appropriate climate response. And we put 4 bullets here, but it's from the organizational side, it's better reporting systems, better maintenance management, being more on top of the facilities. From a technical side, building automation systems. The organizations with the best building automation did best because they could manage things more effectively and monitor things more effectively from a central position. Demand control ventilation is everything, understanding what the indoor air quality is, being able to adjust your HVAC systems to actual current needs. And the boards, very few of you that had in place testing and balancing. People have gone through and tested your air handling system, so you knew where the imbalances were. You knew where the inefficiencies were within those systems. You were better able to deal with the go forward activity necessary to, again, respond to COVID and now exactly the same things, responding to climate, responding to improved energy efficiency and emissions. So the next slide, please. Second, and I don't apologize for repeating myself, knowing where you stand is the starting place. The school boards at the bottom end of this chart have a bigger opportunity for savings than the ones at the top end. The top end boards have the opportunity to share lessons learned that we can all use on a go-forward basis. Your buildings will tell you how much you can save. You can make the business case for action using the numbers that Sustainable Schools has for your utility cost savings potential. In many cases, it's millions of dollars a year. Focus on your high savings potential schools. Sustainable Schools has identified those for you. We'll share that with you. And look for, do you remember that chart, the tornado diagrams? Look at the schools that are showing increases and ask yourself what happened. In many cases, we find boards were not aware those increases were happening, and they're eating massively into the savings that other buildings are making. So use the data to drive your planning, drive your progress, and to know where you stand. Next slide, please. What we need to do to improve energy efficiency is not that complicated. We've got case studies, we've got demonstrations, some of these things we need to develop best practices around and so on, but generally the energy efficiency improvements there, all the way from just improved scheduling, like switch things off, turn things down, set things back when there's few or no people within the buildings. We've talked about testing and rebalancing. We've talked about building automation. So the energy efficiency improvements on the left-hand side, those things pay for themselves. They've got a good economic return. We've just got to do them. So we know what to do. The second half of that equation is looking forward. Low carbon planning says for our new schools, for our infrastructure renewal projects, for the whole idea of electrification and air source heat pumps and ground source heat pumps and exhaust air heat recovery. Low carbon capital planning, we have to build that into our modus operandi, the way that we run our buildings. It has to become part of our organizational culture. But addressing improvements in energy efficiency, which we know how to do, we just have to do them effectively, and addressing low carbon future planning so that every decision that we make is made through the lens of where we need to be in 2030 and 2040 and 2050. We're not making bad capital decisions today. We're not creating stranded assets. We're moving steadily towards the low carbon future. So what has to be done? That's the easy bit, relatively speaking. Next slide, please. The tricky part, and this is where we would really suggest that you focus on your energy conservation and demand management plans, is the organization, the human, the management side of how do we get things done? What gets in the way? This is the hard part for every organization, not just school boards, for hospitals, for commercial office buildings, for colleges, for universities, for every building type you can imagine. If we can get these things lined up, then the technical things to some extent kind of take care of themselves. But from the governance level, like, do we have the right direction, commitment from the top? We hear so many times we haven't got time or resources or money to save $500,000 a year. You know, there's a disconnect there. No, we haven't made the business case for investment, so we're not putting the right resources in place to make things happen. Within our organizations, are we at cross purposes with each other? Do we have the people who are designing the buildings, not paying enough attention to the future needs of operations and management? Is procurement buying the right things? Is our information systems giving us the right information we need to support good decision making? Organizational alignment is a big deal. And knowledge at the end of the day is everything. And Sustainable Schools looks to develop best practice guides, to create case studies. So invest the time to go look at those things, figure out which of these can work for you. Looking externally, the architects, the engineers designing your new schools and your infrastructure and your projects, the service contractors working with you to look after your boilers and your building automation and your mechanical systems. Are they well informed? Are you selecting them from the standpoint of what they know as opposed to just the cost? And in particular, building into everything that you do this continuous feedback. You know which are your more efficient buildings. You know which are the ones that are improving. You're learning from those. You're feeding that information back into your organization. So you're always feeding like the culture of efficiency, that your organization is continuously learning, growing, celebrating, responding, doing the things it needs to get to where we need to go. So this is a longer term process. It's very much built into the culture of the organization, but this developing the how do we get this done? What gets in the way? How do we solve that? We're strongly recommending as being the center point of your energy conservation demand management plan. Assume the savings are there, assume we know what to do. How can we do it? Why didn't we do it last time? How will we do this going forward? Next slide, please. So Sustainable Schools aims to be there to help. We're constantly looking for new opportunities to develop new knowledge. You'll find 2 best practice guides that we think you'll find useful on our website. One around replacing rooftop units, which to some extent applies to all capital projects you have in mind. What is the process? What's the pre-planning that is appropriate before any of these capital projects? What targets should you set? How do you commission them? How do you make sure they're working efficiently? And the piece that we worked on last year with the IESO and a number of groups will come to, you can see the organizations that helped us so much with this. The Strategic Energy Management Guide is really how do you do what I was talking about a moment ago, which as a school board, organize around efficiency so that you're working steadily towards continuous improvement and continuous progress. So the Strategic Energy Management Guide, take a look at that. Next slide, please. The flow chart coming out of that, this we like flow charts because it allows you to kind of run your finger through and track where are you in the process. But the core elements of this, there's data management in the top left-hand corner. If you haven't got an effective energy management information system, whatever it is, however you do it, it's very hard to manage the process. Finding the priority schools, the good ones to recognize, to learn from, and the ones with the big savings potential to pay attention to. The reality that the HVAC systems are the drivers. You should be doing lighting retrofits. You should do them really well. But the HVAC investigation is where most of the gas, most of the electricity, and most of the emission savings will come from. And you can play through all of this. We talked about system testing. We talked about access and capability of your building automation system. We talked about energy data analysis. The most efficient boards generally have the best data analytics, the smartest people looking at the data and getting meaning out of it. The actions you can take are pretty well defined, and then performance verification, closing the loop and saying, did we get the results we were expecting? And if not, why not? And if not, how do we verify that? So these kind of flow diagrams we suggest for your consideration can be the starting point for how you plan to move forward with your energy conservation plans. Next slide, please. So by now, pretty well everybody is tired of hearing me. And what's far more interesting to me and to you is talking to people within the school boards that are responsible for the more efficient boards and getting their ideas of like the action on the ground, the strategies they've adopted, what works, what doesn't. So really delighted to have Kevin and Martin from the Ottawa Catholic School Board, now our top performing board for this year, and Benjamin from one of our biggest school boards in Ontario, from Peel District School Board, where the numbers alone are this tremendous management challenge. But so happy that they're willing to share their experiences with us. We've got some standard questions here that I'm going to work through with them. but you're part of this conversation as well. So if you have questions to ask within this, please put them into the Q&A. Katia will be watching, and where there's a good question to feed into the conversation, we'll do so. And we will commit to every question that goes into there. We will respond to after the webinar with our panelists and on our own behalf. So this is an open conversation. And if I may, Kevin, let me start with you. With lessons learned over the past 5 years through COVID. So we try to make the connection there between the idea of resilient school buildings that if they're good for moving forward with high levels of energy efficiency, they're also working their way fairly well to be able to respond to any future health emergencies that may arise. But what are the highlights, Kevin, for you of what Ottawa Catholic Board has learned over the past 5 years that position you for moving forward over the next 5?
And thank you. So I'd say over the pandemic, I think the Ottawa Catholic School Board definitely emphasized the idea of having a good culture around energy management. And I think that goes to show throughout the pandemic that we were able to relay the message of saving energy to our caretaking staff and to our technicians. I think that was definitely emphasized because there was a priority with everybody to focus on unoccupied buildings. We do have some buildings that have automation, but we do have a lot of buildings that do not have any automation. So they really emphasize those buildings, and we like to thank our care staff for addressing those thermostats and scheduling and just general operations. So I think the idea around culture is valid, and I think it's something to strive for other school boards.
Helpful, thank you, Benjamin. Let's pose the same question to Peel District. Through the chaos of COVID, your board has done well. What lessons learned within there, and what are your key strategies right now?
So thanks, Ian. So the first thing for us was it's really important to have accurate and immediate data. So we have energy metering installed at our schools, which I'll talk about in a second. We also have building automation systems installed now at almost all of our schools. So this allows us to act on problems when they occur. We're able to monitor our schools even when they're unoccupied. I recall we were even asked about from insurance companies about water monitoring when our schools were unoccupied. We have water meters, so we could say, yes, it's okay, we're monitoring. If we have a leak, we'll know. So this allows us to take action right away, and we don't have to wait 1 month or 3 months for the next utility bill.
Helpful. Martin, let's step to you around this second idea. So we want to look forward. We want to say, what have we learned, and how are we going to use that over the next 5 years during our next term of our ACDM plans. As you know, Sustainable Schools has a target for your board. We'll be reviewing that in more depth with you and your individual buildings, and some will have different stories. But meeting targets, what is going to help you beyond what Kevin was saying about the culture that you guys have established there? What will help you set and meet targets over the coming 5 years? What are you thinking about what will be in your ECDM plan for the next 5 years and help you continue to bend the curve from the Ottawa Catholic Board standpoint?
Well, I think by implementing more LED retrofit projects, they seem to work very well for us. And with the IESO Save on Energy incentive program, it also helps us get these programs moving. BAS systems is also another one that remotely we could turn the school down. During COVID, we've seen where everyone was sent home all of a sudden, and we had buildings running while they were unoccupied. But with the BAS system, we were able to shut those down, in a matter of a day, and not have to send people out to those buildings. Unfortunately, there's not all schools have building automation, but I found it's a very effective tool for us in energy management. I think we have to continue training as staff is constantly turning over, and new custodians in schools, learning the new automation systems and operating the building. Every building has its own unique way of running, and just to know when something isn't running correctly and getting the word out to our maintenance team and getting the repairs done, like a leaky faucet or a toilet that's running all the time. It's just keep that, that culture going.
And Benjamin, looking at your massive school board, like way over 200 schools, how do you go about setting targets and again, then meeting targets across such a large portfolio over a relatively short period of time that the next 5 years covers? What does that look like for you, setting and meeting targets?
So I think as far as whether we'll be able to achieve getting all of our schools up to the sustainable schools level, top 25%, we think it's pretty unlikely for all of our schools. A lot of them, we think it's possible, and a lot of work has already been done from where we were 5 years ago. Yes, potentially a lot of schools can get there, but we don't think everyone can do it. And the big reason for the challenge for us, because we have so many schools, we have so much work that has to be done. 50, 100, 200 schools that need work. We don't have 200 project managers to do that. We're starting to look at the OECM. They have some ability to have project managers that are pre-approved there. So possibly that we'll bring in temporary project managers to manage some loads and speed the work along. But we still have to sort of work and see how can we integrate potentially temporary staff into our operation.
Yeah, so resources are a big issue, aren't they? At the same time, the size of your board is, and you've already recorded such big savings that, and I'm sure that the board is seeing that in the cost savings that are materializing. They're quite real, aren't they?
Yeah, and I want to be clear, actually, we do not have a cost constraint, a capital restraint as far as doing the work. We have a senior director who's very supportive of all our work. He always says yes to everything. And he tells us to do more. And that's why our restraint is people. We need the people. It's not a money issue, it's not a problem. And we've already produced a set amount of results, so much that they could cut our utility budget and direct it to in-class resources, which we're really proud of. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do, but we've also achieved a lot. So that gives us the support to continue to move forward. Yeah,
the idea of eliminating pollution and using that to pay for classroom resource, that's a good feeling, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And again, really, we got a fair number of government and utility people on this call. The issue about internal capacity and resources. We can't afford not to do this, but we haven't got the capacity to do this. So how do we square that circle over time? Katya, let me pause for a moment. Do we have questions from the audience that would be good to feed in at this point to any of our panelists?
Yes, I have one that I think will fit right in here. So question from Tyler Bradburn and Thames Valley DSB. How were you able to find savings during COVID while also meeting ASHRAE's ventilation requirements, such as running full ventilation, even if a building was occupied by a single occupant, as well as the pre and post purge sequences?
So let's start with you, Benjamin. You raced up the benchmark chart there during the COVID period. I think you've touched on some of this already, but what were the keys for you?
So we already had a pretty strict, like in terms of ventilation, we had a pretty strict standard prior to COVID as far as how we operate our systems. So what the actual requirements meant to us maybe was a little bit different to other school boards. For example, a single occupant doesn't mean we have to run all of our HVAC systems. Our argument internally on that, because I know that a lot of people are saying, how did you manage that? Our argument was internally, our systems are not designed for one person. They're designed for 500 people or 1,000 people. And it's extremely inefficient to run these huge systems just for one person. So people with 1 or 10 people in the school, they can socially distance. And that argument worked for us. And we had the support of our PO Region Health Authority supported us on that issue. So we didn't have to run the fans maybe as much as other school boards seem to have done. And so that was because we had a strict sort of scheduling standard ahead of time to tell us how should we operate our fans.
Right, and the strength you have in building automation, again, it's a lot easier to be able to implement that centrally.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's the thing. We don't have any schools that are operated locally by our custodians. We have sort of centralized system operation, and we sort of tell them when their system should be on and when they shouldn't be on.
And Martin, let me go to you again. what from your standpoint was the key for actually making not massive but modest improvements over the course of the pandemic?
I think during the pandemic, I'll agree with Benjamin. We did the exact same thing. We wouldn't run the school all night for one person in the school. The massive size of the school, it just didn't make any sense. And that was our procedures too. And I think we had a lot more time with the schools being a little bit less occupied to get a lot of the maintenance projects implemented as well and make these improvements on an ongoing basis.
Great. I want to take the next question, the primary strategies, Kevin, if I could, with you for a moment. So we presented today, if you like, our take, having looked at a lot of organizations and a lot of school boards around the technical being relatively straightforward. You know, Martin, you were very clear. You felt your lighting program, and clearly it has been very effective for you. But Kevin, this kind of coming together of technical and organizational challenges, if you look forward to the next 5 years, can you think about what would be the 1 or 2 or 3 things, and would they be technical things or would they be organizational things? Where do you think the biggest challenges are to maintain your momentum, to stay at the top and to deliver on the rest of the savings potential you have?
Yeah, so I think in order for us to continue moving forward is to take a little bit more of a holistic approach on how we can utilize decarbonization at each school, possibly doing analysis at each school to find out where our capital money can be best spent. I think doing an evaluation of each school, since they are so different, can definitely lead us in the correct direction for any capital investments that we do. So in terms of technology, I think we do install VRF systems, high efficiency rooftop units that are hybrid operating, so heat pump and natural gas, given Ottawa. We do choose to operate them mostly in natural gas, just based on costs. That's our personal choice, but when the utility rates do and can change, we can flip those back and forth as need be to give us enough flexibility. In terms of LED projects, like Martin was saying, we do look at premium efficiency equipment. We're very wise in terms of what value we want to put into our schools for building envelope renovations or for, we'll say, premium HVAC systems, and changing systems from, say, heat pumps to rooftop units to fan power boxes. And we're open to all ideas given what the existing state of the school is.
So you're seeing, I think, from if I could play back, the challenges being mostly on the technical side. Like, what are the equipment selections? What are the system selections on a go-forward basis? Taking the same question to you, Benjamin, at Peel, between organizational challenges and technical challenges, where do you see are the biggest opportunities? Where is the biggest leverage? How are you best going to move forward from here?
So I've got actually 3 things that I noted down. So the first thing that's really important, I've already mentioned it before, the metering and the building automation system. With the metering I'm mentioning, the metering allows us to do measurement and verification. So whenever we do any project, this will also tell us whether that project is actually saving us energy or it is not saving us energy. So the second thing is we have started a program of retro commissioning. We're doing 10 to 20 schools a year. And so actually on every major capital project now, we're going to be doing that. And so we started it about 3 years ago. We've been struggling to get it integrated properly into our maintenance processes and our new construction processes. But we're getting there. We're trying to get the retro commissioning ahead of the project rather than behind the project. And the last thing is using the retro commissioning, we hope to utilize more standardization of our operations, more than we've already done. I mentioned we've already got the scheduling. We also have the standardization. Boilers and chillers are also centrally controlled and operated. And we also have the summer vacation holiday operations. So we have sort of written down policies on how we're supposed to operate during those periods, which we didn't have 5 years ago. So hopefully with the recommissioning, we'll be able to create even more standardized operations for all of our schools.
Yeah, that's part of the strategic energy management guide, is the need for standards. school boards have got way too many buildings to have them all kind of reinventing themselves along the way. So standardization, we'd agree with that is a big deal. Katia, once again, any questions from the floor that would fit nicely in here?
Actually, I was just typing a response to Maurice, but I think I can just mention this live as well. Maurice Buonastella from TDSB was wondering that for the top 20 school boards, how many of those do their BS equipment scheduling centrally rather than by individual school caretakers? And I was saying that we do know that there are different approaches within that group, and that would be an interesting thing to look at in more detail if the boards would be willing to share that information. And that I'll note this down, that we can consider this for a possible future survey.
That would be a very helpful survey. Yeah, let's and happy to feed that back through our website and to everybody directly as well. Let's spend our last few minutes on the panel together talking about collaboration, because the sense we're getting from every building sector, even the private sector, where there's a fair amount of competition and positioning involved, this feels like a time for collaboration where we need to be working together on some of these issues. I know both of your boards are already working with us on collaborative initiatives, but Martin, if I could go back to you, where would you like to be working with other school boards to share knowledge, share ideas, share best practice about some of the things that matter the most to you?
Well, I think on a lot of the projects with HVAC equipment and air conditioning and building automation, which systems they use. I think there's a lot of work with us introducing more fresh air and more cooling into buildings and areas that were never cooled before. I think this is where we have to set our focus. Most of these units are run by gas or refrigerant. I think that's where we need to start.
Same question to you, Kevin, also at Ottawa Catholic Board. Where would you like to see more collaboration? How can we best bring school boards, industry, government, whoever, together to solve some of the things that you're working on?
Yeah, so I think in terms of what I was speaking to before is having these decarbonization plans. I think it would be neat to have these templated sort of designs. Say you have a existing school that has heat pumps. What is the best path moving forward? Is it the best to change to a VRF system? Is it best to remove all the heat pumps, install a rooftop unit and new duct distribution and terminal units at each classroom? Or is, say you have an off-grid school, you have oil supplied, you want to change to propane, you want to go to ground source. What is the best avenue for decarbonization? Kind of having a template for each school, say whatever system you have existing, what is your best investment strategy to achieve your best, say, cost of emissions and for energy consumption?
Interesting, thank you. And Benjamin, last word to you on this collaboration, where you've got such a huge challenge. I think you're one of the biggest school boards in Ontario, and therefore one of the larger ones in North America. Where would collaboration help you?
I think it'd be really good to see some more case studies. I think particularly where we're working with new technologies or LED systems. Maybe you've done some crazy switching system that was really complicated and maybe it didn't work out. It would be really nice for other school boards to know, hey, this worked for us or this didn't work for us. Because especially when we're dealing with new technologies or heat pumps, for example, Ottawa may be a good example. It'd be really nice to know how heat pump works in your school board, because you guys are really cold, right? Or if it didn't work, that would also be really nice to know, so we can take some lessons learned from those things. So I think there could be an opportunity for more case studies between school boards to find out what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a great point. We learn a lot from case studies of success stories. We learn a whole lot more from the shaggy dog stories about what went horribly wrong, because avoiding the missteps is just as valuable as taking the good steps. See where that got. Time, I think, Katja, if we could, and Carolyn, to turn it to the audience. We've got some questions we'd love everybody to respond to us today on, if you can, and just share with us as openly as you like. You don't have to identify yourselves, but we'd love it if you would. But can we switch over to the poll? And Kevin, Martin, and Benjamin, please do fill this in yourselves as well. Your votes are at least as weighted as anybody else's.
Yes, we'll bring up, I'll bring up the poll in just a second. Wanted to mention that we had a few questions come in about the details of things like BS scheduling, operating hours, and the design philosophies for new buildings. So I'm noting all of that down, and we would love for our panelists to provide some more information on that after the webinar, which we'll share with the webinar attendees.
Great thought. So we'll impose upon you again, Benjamin, Martin, and Kevin. We'll circulate those questions to you, and if you can give us your thoughts in writing, then we'll share them with everybody.
Okay, let me.
So the next slide has the poll questions, does it?
Yes, I can do that, and then I'll launch the poll. So this is for school board attendees.
So this is very much following the lines of what we've just been discussing, your biggest technical challenges, your biggest organizational challenges, if you could share those. And again, please be candid. There's a lot of people listening to this that have a real interest in helping. So here are the questions. What do you need to be able to move forward with making real deep improvements? I love this as the numbers pop up on the screen. We generally figure a 30% response of everybody on the call is a good one. And look at you guys already racing up to 40%.
We're at about a minute and a half for the poll, and 50% have participated. I believe I can keep the poll open, Ian, and you can keep going with the remaining couple of slides that we have.
Then let's do exactly that. And thank you so much. This is a great response. Really happy when people step up. And again, I can't imagine any more important times when we've had these events in the past. This really is a moment of action right now. So getting your feedback will be helpful. And we have a lot of stakeholders who want to hear what you have to say. So this is extremely helpful. So let's go back to the, keep the poll open. Let's go back to our last couple of slides and talk about where do we go from here? What's next?
Do you see the next slide, Ian? I have it on the screen.
Yeah, I think I have to end my poll, don't I?
Probably you do. Oh, I think you ended it for everybody. Hold on a second.
Right. Okay. So next steps. There are the three elements that we're going to be working on here, and I think the key message is to the extent that it's useful to you, please stay in touch with us. Sustainable Schools wants to hear from you. We take most of our direction from the people that communicate with us. But coming up is your energy conservation demand management plans, your practical pathways to 2029, which is 1 year away from this big 2030 target threshold. So again, we can help you with, if you wish to reach out to us, with understanding the metrics that we run through Sustainable Schools. We think they're useful. People tell us that they are. We can talk to you about strategic energy management, that whole process, that whole flow diagram. We can provide some support to how that works. We can give you some guidance on some of the questions that were coming up from the panel around low carbon infrastructure. And it's not just our ideas. We are reaching out to people on a regular basis. And when you've got new schools coming along, we have a real interest in what should the operational standards be for new school buildings, which are the most efficient out there right now, how good can they be, how good should they be. So we plan to share information on all of that, and we'd love to hear from you one-on-one. We will be working towards cohort projects. We had a lot of questions about air source heat pumps, about HVAC testing and capacity building, like where do you find good contractors and are there enough of them out there? And the reference to better LED lighting retrofit solutions. We've done some work on that already and plan to bring that out. The key for us is going to be impact. Like we have to deliver savings. It's not about activity, it's about results. So systematic action on high leverage opportunities, not just the schools that you have to do infrastructure work on, but look at your high savings potential buildings, make that happen. And this whole idea of broadening the base, the more of the school boards and school districts that we're in conversation with, the more ideas we pick up, the better able we are to network that and spread it around and imagine the kind of webinars, the kind of events we can hold. Because again, this is going to come down to collaboration. I guarantee that even the biggest and best of you, we have things to learn from each other, and there is no time left to be able to reinvent all those wheels. So broadening the base, sharing data, sharing knowledge, sharing best practices, and we are already reaching out beyond Ontario to let's get the best and the brightest and the smartest together. Next slide. So finally, once again, our thanks to our 4 webinar sponsors. We couldn't do any of this without you. We really appreciate your help. As far as you're concerned, all the school boards on the line, please stay in touch. Let us know, and we're happy to get on a webinar with you and quickly share your ranking and the detailed results for all of your individual schools. Stay in touch with our website. Drop us an email, drop us communication. We love being in touch. That helps us do a better job and helps us leverage that job. More broadly, Katia is your ever able program manager. Looks forward to hearing from you. The website is sustainableschools.ca. Thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to do this with us today. Thank you again to our panelists for your candor and your experience and your willingness to share that with us today, not just today, but also in the prep meetings that we've had with you. And wish everybody every success over the next 5 years in delivering on your emissions reduction potential, and wishing you all an excellent day. Thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.